Every week, we go through another chapter of A Song of Ice and Fire. Right now, we're still on Game of Thrones. I've read all the books. Josh has not read any of the books. We're going to break down every chapter, looking for it for insights, for just new experiences, and analyze it to see how it works, how it functions, what we feel about it, and where it's going from here. Today, we read Eddard VII, the seventh Ned chapter. I think he's like well outpacing the rest of the characters.
He is,
in the book at this point.
His days are numbered. So.
His days are numbered, yes. But that's part of the fun of this book, is that he's the one who dies, but he's also the one who has by far the most time.
Oh, yeah.
So he's the one we least expect to die.
Oh, yeah.
Which is all part of the big magic that is this book. Anything stick out about this chapter to you, Josh?
No, it just reinforces my theory that he's like the old noir tale of, mystery. Did you say it was an Agatha Christie, or was that another chapter? I couldn't remember if that was another chapter.
I mean, but you've said in the past that a lot of these Ned chapters play like mystery novels.
Mystery novel, yeah.
And I, at some point, made some Agatha Christie crack, I think.
Yeah, no, I like that. And, even though we know what happens to him, or at least I do, it is nice to see that his story play out this way in a little bit. I'm almost to the point where I'm getting invested in it, and I'm like, nothing's going to happen. You know how you rewatch a movie or like a sports game, and you know what happens, but you get to a certain point, and you're like, maybe it ended differently, and you convince yourself. So I'm kind of in that point with
it's called
Ned.
Insanity.
But it is, and I'm feeling it with Ned. But there was a lot that happened in this chapter.
There was. I mean, I think a part of the reason why people want to get invested is because Martin's very good at playing with expectations, that he writes it so in a way that we're familiar with, in a way that makes us want to get invested and to want Ned to see his journey through.
Yeah.
And then he upends it, and we don't see it coming. For example, he says things like there's one part where Ned talks about kind of the whole conspiracy and says the dagger, Bran's fall, all of it was linked somehow to the murder of John Arryn. He could feel it in his gut. And that kind of ties into that whole hard-boiled noir thing, where it's this guy who's out on his own, he's piecing this together, and his heart is true, and he's got a gut feeling about it. And like in most movies and TV shows and books, when the hero has this gut feeling and he follows it, it usually ends up being right, I feel like.
Yeah.
And we've watched those, and we've read those, and we're used to that. So I feel like the instinct is that, well, he'll go through some trials and tribulations, sure, but in the end, his gut feeling will be rewarded. And then the twist is, oops, it's not.
It's so aggressively not rewarded.
Incredibly aggressively not.
It's literally off with your head. So it's
right.
Yeah, but I do like that hard-boiled kind of aspect of this. I did write down in my notes that it's basically like a noir, and I also liked how it was kind of like very Pulp Fiction-y with the death of Hugh and all that, where it's like we saw that in another chapter and we were like, Sansa didn't really know about it that much, and then it's in this chapter, it's like, oh, okay, it makes sense because Ned and all this kind of stuff. So I also like that. Maybe it was just because I'm connecting dots that aren't there with going overboard, comparing it to like old noir things, but that was very pulpy. Like this whole something happens in this one chapter and I completely glossed over it. I was like, oh, whatever. And then in this chapter, I was like, oh, that's right. So maybe a little bit of the mystery paid off. But
yeah, it's cool. I like the Pulp Fiction reference because you're right. It's like it's literally what it is. We have two separate perspectives in the same event. Sansa watched this tournament. She watched the Mountain kill Sir Hugh of the Vale.
Yep.
But she has no idea what it means. It's terrifying. Some guy died in front of her. But she doesn't realize this has implications for this whole John Arryn murder plot. Because, Sir Hugh of the Vale was John Arryn's squire.
Yep.
And Ned wants to talk to him. He probably knows something. And again, it's that pulpy thing. He knew too much. So he had to go.
Right. Oh, man.
But the funny thing is, it's vague, too, because, I mean, maybe he was killed to be silenced, or maybe the Mountain is just a freaking freak and a monster. He clearly is a bad, bad man, and he just killed him, because that's what he does.
No coincidence. Like we were talking about last week with the chapters where, you can't have too many coincidences, but maybe that's what we got here.
Well, I mean, I remember that I wrote down that the Mountain is portrayed as like this horrible, despicable, awful person. I mean, we're listed as him. Even in this one, he kills a horse, which is one of the famous moments from Game of Thrones. Like, it's one of the moments that I was like, okay, this show's a little different. When like he cut off the horse's
beheading
head.
Horses.
He tries to kill Loras Tyrell.
Yeah.
Even though this is like a tournament, it's like it's supposed to be for show, but he's really going for blood.
All in. Yeah.
They talk about how he like probably killed his father, his first 2 wives, his servants disappear. Like he's the worst man in the world. And I wrote down that I didn't think that setup for him being the worst ever really pays off because, I mean, the Mountain, he's, now he's just like a silent dude and never really says
zombie
anything.
thing.
He's hard to know.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking now, literally just now, well, it does put into our heads some doubt about what happened to Sir Hugh because this guy, he does work for the Lannisters. Someone said that Thomas says, Juliana says that he's Cersei's dog. He is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, maybe he did act on their wishes, but maybe he's just freaking crazy and just wants to kill somebody. So there's, like any good mystery, you can't give him straight answers. You have to keep it a little vague.
Yeah. And this was also the birth of Clegane Bowl, too.
It was the birth of Clegane Bowl.
Heard a lot about that covering the show. Everybody wants it to happen and come back.
That's interesting. So, like, what have you heard as, like, someone who's not knee-deep in this stuff?
I actually had to go in deep dive into Clegane Bowl because I didn't know. Everybody's
really?
like, yeah, we want this to happen. And I was like, what the heck is going on? And then I was like, oh, okay, the Mountain and the Hound. And I don't know if that kind of honestly seems like it would be a one-sided battle. I don't think I love the Hound, but the Mountain is just so psychotic, and everything that we've learned about him both in the show and the book. Something about the descriptions in the book were very interesting because I've never really pictured him as human. Like even on the show, he's just this big, brutish, like almost a giant character. Not like Pip or any of those actual giants, but like I've never really kind of humanized him.
Sure. No,
and so this kind of really played into that.
completely.
So I was like, oh yeah, this makes sense. Like all of these really awful, like almost Dracula like lore. Like you go to his castle and you'll disappear and all this kind of stuff. So I guess I wouldn't say that it didn't pay off for me. I get what you're saying, and I understand that too. But in a way, it kind of did because he's always been an inhumane character to me.
He is.
So he is a monster. I've never been like this is a guy who has a wife and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, ugh, no.
I mean, when I was saying it didn't really pay off, I was thinking in relation to people like Joffrey and Ramsay, who are just as monstrous, but we know them better.
Yeah.
Like, Ramsay was as Dracula-like as anybody.
Oh, yeah.
Hunting women with dogs and killing babies, killing his stepmother, killing his father. He's just as bad. But I felt like we knew what made him tick a little more.
Yeah.
The Mountain, we never really know what makes him tick.
That's almost more terrifying, too.
Yeah, that's true.
He's just, Ramsay had motivations and Joffrey had motivations. And like you said, maybe the Mountain just killed a guy because he wanted to kill a guy. Like, I don't see Ramsay killing somebody without having a couple of different steps planned out. Like, he killed somebody for a reason. I mean, like, to the point, like, maybe he would, but I think like him versus the Mountain and Joffrey, all those three, I think Joffrey and Ramsay would very much, they're going to kill somebody because it works into the game, whereas the Mountain's going to, pop out Oberyn's eyeballs because, he just wants to. So,
right, he just
and
wants
that's a truly monstrous character.
Yeah, he's effective.
And that's why
I guess there's room for all kinds of monsters in this story.
And that's why I don't think the Hound would stand much of a chance. I think it would be a very heroic death for the Hound, but I think that, especially now that
in Clegane Bowl, you think the Hound would win?
Yeah. I would be rooting for the Hound, but now there's almost like steroids because like the Mountain's a zombie. Like, can you even kill them? Is he even alive? Can you kill something that's
a good
not
point.
alive? Like,
I think right here we have a comment from Juliana that says, I mean, if he dies, there won't be a big payoff because he's practically dead already.
Yeah.
It'll just be for show. Also interesting. Although Kelly thinks the Mountain is a beast, which I can also agree with that.
isn't he like a really sweet guy in real life too? Like.
The actor,
yeah,
the giant man.
Yeah, I feel like he has like a goat farm somewhere. He's just very gentle.
Funny. He likes the social media. He likes doing like funny little like. There was one bit where he was like going to malls in wherever he's from, Denmark at Christmas, and I forget, like handing out candy. And he knows how intimidating he looks, so it's a fun little game he plays.
There you go.
I mean, Oberyn almost killed the Mountain. I mean, so he can be killed. He just got cocky and then ruined everything. Right. Okay. One more thing I want to talk about is the whole. I thought this chapter did a lot with the whole idea of this story as a subversion, if I can get literary for a second, of the whole point of A Song of Ice and Fire. One of the many points is that it presents a world that we think we recognize, dragons, knights, maidens, all that medieval stuff, like a King Arthur-y type place, and then it subverts it. I mean, literally, we just talked about how Ned Stark's whole story is you think it's going the way you think, and then it doesn't. In smaller ways, he's subverting the notion of chivalry throughout. And I think the best example of that to me is the scene where Robert Baratheon, who's this brave warrior king, is too fat to fit into his armor. It's funny, and it hits that theme really hard. Like, you think a king is noble and good and a fighter. No, he's a fat ass who can't even put in his armor.
Fit in his armor. Yeah. It was weird. It reminded me of like Kevin Smith in that moment because he always jokes about he's too fat to fly, and it kind of reminded me of that, like Robert Baratheon's too fat to fight. So, and I like that because there's been other things that we've seen, or not seen, but read in the book so far that kind of do go against the grain of like these stories that these traditional fantasy. So like we kind of talked about with Arya and like the hero's journey a little bit, and we're not that well versed on it as Preston is or Richard Preston is writing about it on the site, but like that those things in there. And then you also have things with like Sansa too. So she is a Stark and she is from this one place, but she does want this other life. But even that kind of trope of girl who wants the princess who wants to be the princess, we saw in the last chapter, maybe she doesn't really want, there's things in there, there's little hints in there that maybe she doesn't want the life she thinks she wants. And that's kind of like this overall theme that we're seeing with like Ned and his story not going where it's going to go. And we've got, the whole Varys thing going on and Littlefinger and all these characters. I really do appreciate, I'm not big into fantasy, so it's something that I'm particularly up on or something like that, but I have picked up on the cues of how it's kind of going against the grain. And again, I'm reminded more and more, deeper and deeper we get into this book, of how much credit George R.R. Martin doesn't get, I think, because everything I've heard, with the Clegane Bowl, looking at that from the 30,000 foot view, George R.R. Martin has always been like this old guy in the woods who doesn't want to write this next book. And now I'm going back and actually reading, and it's like, oh yeah, this is actually, I can see why this is such a big thing. It
might take a while to do, because he is very detailed. Like in terms of world building, even we get more drive-bys. We get introduced to Lancel Lannister this time, and again, just like slipped in there. And like Lancel's the guy who helped Cersei kill Robert, and he ends up going to the Faith Militant later, and then gets her thrown in jail. So he'll come back around. We get glimpses of Thoros of Myr, who's the guy who has the flaming sword, and it's good and fun. A guy who isn't in the show or much is Ange the Archer, but I don't know, note that name. He'll come back. So, yeah, he is very detailed. You can understand why a book might take a while, because all of this, it takes time to parse out. And he said that he's a slow writer. And with this, I think that you and I, what we're doing, and I'm reading this stuff, there is stuff to unpack.
Oh, yeah.
So there is stuff to go over. And you can read it and just like enjoy it, but you can also like dig into it. And that can only happen if you take the time to write it correctly.
Well, and also it's unlike other books that I've read in that you go chapter to chapter and it continues the story, whereas this feels very episodic to me.
Oh, yeah?
Like there's so much, like the Ned chapters in particular. Yeah, and like the Ned chapters in particular, I know we kind of talked about them the most as being like mystery novels, but they feel like individual episodes of this book and not just chapters, because we go from Ned and we have all the, like, even everything that happened in this chapter is very structured. It's very thought out, and it's linear, and you can really dig into it, and like there's a lot to unpack. It feels like an episode of a TV show, whereas and I feel like I have read some
why it works so well as a TV show.
Exactly. Well, like it almost makes me wonder why they didn't do the episodes like the chapters, because it would be an interesting way to structure your TV show, going from person to person.
They did for a while, for the first season. Are you saying they should have done it like one chapter per episode?
Well, that's an interesting way to structure the show. I can see why they didn't end up doing that, but it is a weird balance between the two. It kind of reminds me of like The Sopranos a little bit, where it's like you have one episode that's really focused on this one thing, and then you move to another one, but it all fits together. And that's a hard thing to write for TV, and it's a really hard thing to write for a book when something you can put down and pick back up.
Right.
And we've been reading this for a couple of months now, and it's something, even as complicated as the chapters are, I feel like you can put it down, pick it back up, and it's jump right in, and it's I'm amazed. I'm more amazed by George R.R. Martin than I ever thought I would be.
Yeah,
So.
it rewards study. Although I'm curious if we're lucky enough to get to the fourth and fifth book. I'm curious to see your feelings on those. Before we wrap up, let's talk
Glowing
about
endorsement.
Varys quick, because he has this ending show. First question is, so in this scene, he like sneaks into the Tower of the Hand Room to see Ned, and he's dressed in like a cloak, and I don't know, he smells different. Ned doesn't even recognize him. So in the books, this is something they did not do for the show. Varys is a master of disguise.
Apparently.
And this is not the only time this happens. He like
Really?
disguises himself, different guises he goes around. Apparently no one can tell it's him. Do you think they should have kept that bit in? Because obviously that's not in the show.
No.
He's just always the bald Eggman shuffling around. They
Very
take that out.
noticeable. Very, you can pick him out
Yes.
of a police lineup. So,
Do you think it's something that they should have kept?
I mean, I enjoyed it. It was a little
It's fun.
different because I was like, oh wait, I don't remember this from the show. Like this
Right.
is, Varys is a master of disguise. It fits his character perfectly.
It does, because he's
So-
all about sneaking and hearing whispers and all that crap.
Yeah. So, I guess again this
And
is
he's an
another-
actor. They do mention that on the show. so-
Yeah, and this is another example of something where being able to dig into it deeper in the book helps it make a little bit more sense. Because I can see why they can have to gloss over it in the show, and it just so happens that he pops them from place to place, which works with his mystique of his character.
Sure.
Where Varys is always listening, and his little birds are always listening. But I do like the idea of him being a master of disguise, just because it's almost comical to me. Like I feel like he's walking around like
was a
Tootsie or
little
something
funny.
like that, and like he's just infiltrating all of the high society of
I'm just gonna
Westeros.
spoil it. He does get in drag at one point in the
I'm
books.
very here for Varys and drag.
This is a good question from Juliana. Do you guys think that Varys meant for Ned to join him in supporting the Targaryen restoration? I thought he was hopeful when Ned defended Dany. So I think what she's basically asking is like, so Varys comes to Ned and he's like, you know, look, the Lannisters are trying to kill Robert Baratheon,
Yeah.
and they killed Jon Arryn. Do you think he's being sincere? And you can use what you know about who Varys really is and who he really supports.
I don't think so. I think that, we know that he's working with the Targaryens. So I honestly think that Varys is not going to he's not going to offer his loyalty to Ned. I think he sees Ned as somebody who's in the way, just a pawn in the game, which is kind of why he's not. If he would have opportunities to try to help him out, try to get him on board, he would have already done it. He's not going to wait until now and just kind of like be like, here's all of the answers that you seek.
I mean, he
Wait
did
till-
say that he said like, I was waiting to see if I could trust you. So he gives some justification. But I think the interesting thing about that bit is that he's going to Ned and offering some information, even though we know he wants what he really is in support of the Targaryens. That's whose corner he's in.
Oh, yeah.
And he wants the Lannisters and Starks to fight. So basically, Ned's being manipulated by everybody, and Ned's wrong about everything. He's wrong
supposed to be our
about his
hero.
gut feeling.
Yeah.
About it all being connected to Bran's fall and the dagger and all of that, murder Jon Arryn. He's wrong about that. He's wrong about Varys. So, in retrospect, he never stood a chance. This is one line I think we can end on.
in
Some
retrospect,
good comments, people, by the way. These are all really nice. Lauren Gross says that Varys in the books is so much more shady in the books than in the show, and I liked that, which is true. He is a
Yeah.
little more muddled in the books.
yeah.
And Dan points out that he wasn't disguised when he visited Ned in the Black Cells. Yeah, I guess, but it wasn't like you can't possibly recognize him disguised like it is in the books.
He is a lot of little. I do get a lot of Littlefinger vibes from Varys, more so in the book than I do in the show. I think a little bit early on, I was untrusting
Yeah.
of Varys, but they kind of separated from that, and
They
now
do.
it's like
they establish him as like the good skeevy sneak person, as opposed
yeah.
to Littlefinger, who's the bad one. Whereas in the books, they're kind of more both on that level the whole way through.
And I do appreciate that, like she did.
There's this one line that Ned just says, for a moment, Eddard Stark wanted nothing more, so much as to return to Winterfell, to the clean simplicity of the North, where the enemies were winter and the wildlings beyond the wall. And maybe he should have. Any other concluding thoughts, Josh?
In retrospect, is Ned perhaps the stupidest Game of Thrones character?
In retrospect, I think he might be.
He's like a martyr because he dies in the first season, the first book, and all this stuff, and we like him, and for rightful reasons, and his ripple effect goes across all of these different characters, but he's wrong about everything, and he's like this big, smart, noble character, and it's like you're literally could not be more wrong about everything.
I mean, I do think that there's a difference between being stupid and being wrong. I mean, just the way he's just not used to this kind of thing. Like in the north, like you said right there, the enemies are, it's cold out and there are wildlings. That's what you fight. You don't do any of this sneaking behind murder plot stuff. So he's just out of his element, and it never works out for him. Anyway, thanks for coming, everybody. These have been good comments this week. And I think next week, in retrospect, Emma, yes, in retrospect, not going forward. The whole point of the book is that it tricks you into believing he is going on the right track. I think we should read the next 2 chapters. We got a Tyrion chapter.
All right.
And I believe an Arya chapter, whatever the next 2 are. Yes, Tyrion and Arya.
Yes.
So we will see you next Wednesday at 4 o'clock on Take the Black here on the Winners Coin Facebook page. Congratulations to whoever won the 2 tickets. I will get back to you post-haste, and see you next week at Wednesday.
Yep.